Hare Krishna, dear Vaishnavis. Welcome to our day 4 of our pre-Janmashtami celebrations. In the Song of the Gopis sang, "The nectar of your words and the descriptions of your activities are the life and soul of those suffering in this material world. These narrations, transmitted by learned sages, eradicate one's sinful reactions and bestow good fortune upon whoever hears them. These narrations are broadcast all over the world and are filled with spiritual power. Certainly, those who spread the message of Godhead are most munificent." His Holiness Bhakti Acharya Swami explains that from this verse we can see that 5,000 years ago, the gopis forecasted Srila Prabhupada's appearance. Lord Chaitanya, who did not want to see King Prataparudra, embraced the king upon hearing this verse. Lord Chaitanya kept saying, "Burida, Burida." The one who distributes Krishna consciousness all over the world is most munificent. He hinted that Prabhupada will come and distribute Krishna consciousness. Growing up, I read Lilamrita and watched Abhay Charan. I thus concluded that Prabhupada is my grandfather, and for my orals about my family in school, I would speak about Prabhupada and the Parampara, for I wanted to proudly share my illustrious family with my class. I think I can speak for everyone when I say that we are ecstatic to hear anything and everything about Prabhupada. Who better to share with us Srila Prabhupada's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious ways than his beloved daughter and our dear aunt, Malati Devidasi. What follows is but a glimpse into her life of service to Prabhupada. She is an integral part of ISKCON and is part of the core that pioneered the development of our global family. She was part of the Magnificent Six, who established Krishna consciousness in the UK. She moved to India to assist in bringing Krishna consciousness back to its source. Malati Devidasi shared the gift of Krishna consciousness in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark via traveling programs for women and through the distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books. She established an all-female ISKCON temple, which later was awarded a large roadside bronze plaque by the State of Ohio Historical Society, recognizing the center as the first Vaishnava temple in its state. Malati Devidasi joined the GBC and her responsibilities are focused in the US of A. She is the founding member of the Vaishnavi Ministry and facilitates highly organized retreats. Malati Devidasi personally organizes the annual Vaishnavi retreat in New Vrindavan, West Virginia. Another project of hers is the Festival of Inspiration, which is also held at New Vrindavan. This is one of North America's largest gatherings with a theme of Vaishnava education and culture. Malati Devidasi spends most of her time traveling, offering guidance in Krishna conscious practice and philosophy, and is a regular participant in interreligious gatherings. She's co-authoring a book that is a compilation of personal remembrance of her god sisters, who are the darling daughters of Srila Prabhupada. She holds a deep concern for the future of ISKCON in general, and for the youth in particular. She advocates engaging women in all manners of service, inspired by Srila Prabhupada, who always engaged her in service. Without further ado, let us delve into the love and compassion of Srila Prabhupada, which droppeth like raindrops. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I think that this little introduction was very nice, but there's a few inaccuracies. First of all, you mentioned the Magnificent Six who went to UK, but I'm very sorry, there were 7 of us. My daughter Saraswati was part of the group, even though she was just a few weeks old. Also, for 12 years, I did organize the Vaishnavi retreat in New Vrindavan, as well as Festival Inspiration, but they are no longer occurring in new management, different times and places. So, and then regarding the temple in the Vaishnavi temple in Ohio, it still exists, but it's totally integrated now. And that large plaque that you mentioned, I want to give the credit to Rasa Manjari from Netherlands, who was our temple president at the time, and she's the one who really pushed that home. So, you know, I want to honor her for that. And last but not least, the book that you mentioned with the interviews with the Vaishnavis, the disciple ladies of Srila Prabhupada, it is now out, available, and ready for your purchase on Amazon. And I don't know how, if you can share the screen maybe toward the end, but the name is A Bond of Love, Srila Prabhupada and His Daughters. And there's 305 interviews and 598 pages. So it's quite a wealth of knowledge and information and deep glimpses into Srila Prabhupada as was experienced by his daughters. Because heretofore, most of the information on Srila Prabhupada is coming basically from the male side, from their experience. But there was, as you can see when you read this book, an incredible amount of valuable experiences, instructions, and services given to given from Srila Prabhupada to his lady disciples. It's just that it hasn't been hitting the airwaves, but now it's available. And actually it's quite revolutionary because in fact it's actually much more even than any of the men's books, because their books are just a few, but here we have so many Vaishnavis, 305, and you know, that's just a drop in the bucket, but it's the ones we managed to get. So please, when you can, A Bond of Love, Srila Prabhupada and His Daughters, it's available on Amazon, and take advantage. People often say, oh, I wish I could have been there when Srila Prabhupada was present. Well, Prabhupada's physical presence, certainly it's no longer available, but from my personal experience, my real relationship with Srila Prabhupada actually developed following his departure. So you can still have that closeness with Srila Prabhupada, you can develop it today. And when you want to know somebody, the best thing to do is find someone who knows that person. You speak to them and they tell you about the person, just like Srila Prabhupada is telling us about Krishna. We want to know Krishna, and Srila Prabhupada is that conduit that connects us with Krishna. So here in these interviews with the Vaishnavis, there are connections, conduits to Srila Prabhupada. So I think it's actually quite historical. I don't think any other previous Acharya has had such a wealth of information where people can go and in a consolidated form learn so much about them. So Srila Prabhupada, when he departed, he left the means, just like the sadhus and saintly persons, when they depart from the material world, they leave behind the means for others to cross over the ocean nations. And Srila Prabhupada did that in such a magnificent, grand way with all of his books. There's videos, there's conversations, there's a wealth of recorded information. So we never have to feel alone or bereft from Srila Prabhupada's presence. And of course, when one wants to come closer to a person, then you offer some service that will catch the person's attention, and you will find yourself automatically coming closer. One time a god sister asked Srila Prabhupada, her name, begins with a D. I'll get it in a minute. My brain drops names sometimes, but she asked Srila Prabhupada, how can I get closer to you? How can I know you? How can I get closer to you? She was a book distributor, and she rarely had the opportunity for personal service. But on this particular occasion in San Francisco, she was cleaning his room, and somehow she didn't get done before he returned. So when he came back, she was still in the room, at the back of the room, and she had to kind of scoot out to the to the doorway. But then she thought, wow, here's my chance. I can ask any question I want. I'm with Srila Prabhupada in his room. So she asked him, how can I come closer? How can I know you more? And Prabhupada's answer fits right in with preparations for Janmashtami. His answer was, read Krishna book. So, and of course, when you read Krishna book, it's just filled with so much depth through the purports. In fact, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that actually I don't write these books. And the devotee they said that to were looking like, it was Tamal Krishna, I think, Mahabhuti, because they kind of looked at each other, what is he saying? And Prabhupada said that whenever I read these books, I learned something new. So they're getting really mystified. He says, because I don't write these books. When I pick up the pen to write, Krishna comes and he dictates to me, and I simply write what he is telling me. So if you just meditate on that for a moment, it's a very overwhelming endorsement for the authenticity of the beautiful voluminous purports Prabhupada has kindly left behind for all of us and those in the future and the future and future to come closer to him and closer to Krishna. Okay, so that wasn't part of my talk, but anyway, there it was. Okay, let me just get things here. So Srila Prabhupada, just a second, I have to adjust here. Okay. So Srila Prabhupada has pointed out that Krishna appeared in a very special way in this age of Kali, and that is by appearing as this holy name, this Kali Kale Namarupa Krishna Avatar, Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela 1722, that Krishna has appeared in the form of the holy name, so there will be people who will be attracted by the holy name, and at the same time, there will also be people who will try to stop any propagation of the holy name. And those who are trying to stop the propagation of the holy name, they're known as demons or asuras. But those who accept the holy name, they're the devotees. And this is how one will show allegiance to Krishna in this age, simply by accepting the holy name, because this holy name, Krishna's holy names are non-different from Krishna. And by taking shelter of the holy name, Krishna gives protection to his devotees, and the holy name will even give protection to anyone who chants sincerely. So when Krishna appears, he sends his important players ahead of himself to pave the way, as well as those who will accompany him during his descent and even later, those who will follow later to maintain the momentum and carry forth the message. So we know that Lord Chaitanya prophetically said, my name will be chanted in every town and village. One may say, Lord Chaitanya, being God, being Krishna himself, he could have easily fulfilled his own desire. But Srila Prabhupada was deputed by Lord Chaitanya to fulfill his directive. One time when asked that same question, if Lord Chaitanya was God, why didn't he do this himself? Prabhupada modestly replied, because he left something for me to do. So Srila Prabhupada fulfilled the desire of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by ensuring that his holy name would be chanted in every town and village all over the world. He took it outside the confines of India, and without any doubt, he fulfilled that desire. So the process of advancing in Krishna consciousness and devotional service is described in the Srimad Bhagavatam 3:25-25. Prabhupada explains that the first point is that one must seek association of persons who are Krishna conscious. In other words, sadhu sangha, associating with devotees. But then he further qualifies it by adding, and who are engaged in Krishna service. So it's not just enough to, like, put on that tilak, stick your hand in the bag and do some chanting, but one must be engaged in devotional service. In a purport, which I can't remember the verse, but in that purport in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada used the term practical service. So without such association, one can't make advancement. Simply by the theoretical knowledge or study, one cannot make any appreciable advancement. So then he goes on to say, one who has firm faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes fixed, and his attraction for association with the Lord and the devotees increases. And then he makes a very clear statement that association with the devotees means association with the Lord. And the devotees who make this association develop the consciousness for rendering service to the Lord. And then when you're fixed in that service, in serving Krishna, then transcendental position of devotional service, one gradually becomes perfect. So Srila Prabhupada was a living reminder, a living example of a pure Krishna Bhakta, a pure devotee of Krishna. And he had so many wonderful qualities that it's almost impossible to actually list them all. But I thought I would just mention a few of his wonderful qualities that endeared him to us and built faith in us through his activities and through his association, his activities, and his counseling, his teaching. So in 68 September, there was a conversation, and in this we see how a devotee is kind to everyone. That's one of the qualifications. So Prabhupada was talking, and he mentioned, so now another thing. And that other thing was that girls should not be taken as inferior. He goes, you see, and sometimes, of course, the scriptures say that women are as cause of bondage, or women are less intelligent. He goes, that should not be aggravated. That women is inferior, or something like that. So the girls who come to Krishna consciousness, you should treat them nicely. After all, anyone who's coming to Krishna consciousness, man or woman, boys or girls, they are welcome. They're very fortunate, you see. So Srila Prabhupada exemplified the kindness to everyone. And another quality of a devotee, devotees do not quarrel with anyone. And in early 67, I had an experience like that when I brought a friend of mine who I thought really needed to meet Srila Prabhupada and hear from him and take to Krishna consciousness. She was maybe 2 or 3 years older than me, but she was constantly miserable, although she was constantly trying to be happy. And her avenue of trying to be happy was that she had as much sex as she could with anybody almost. And she never could see that activity was really why she was miserable. So I thought if she meets Prabhupada, it'll be some kind of like awakening. So she came, I didn't say all that to her, I just brought her. And so she sat and listened. And then after the lecture, she raised her hand, and I was having really good hopes at this time. Well, she's heard, she wants to ask a question, but she didn't have a question. She had an opposing viewpoint and an argument, and she said that she told Srila Prabhupada that she thought sex was equal to experiencing God. So Srila Prabhupada, in a very calm manner, explained that was not really the case. But she wasn't having it. So she says, when I have sex, I experience God. And again, Prabhupada tried to explain to her, but the poor girl was so bewildered, she couldn't hear it. And she tried again, third time. And then Srila Prabhupada, in such a wonderful, compassionate, humble manner, said, I have only brought one medicine. Please take it. And he picked up the kartals and began a very sweet kirtan. So that was our medicine. And that, although the person was trying to quarrel, Prabhupada didn't enter into it, and instead tried to give her the proper medicine. Another wonderful example of Srila Prabhupada, fixed in the absolute truth. He never deviated from presenting Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Like nowadays, there are devotees that won't even say Krishna's name to anybody. They'll go the Divine One or some kind of vague, the superpower, something to that effect, but they won't say Krishna's name. And their reasoning is, well, they don't want to offend anybody. Anyway, so that they can offend Krishna. But Prabhupada never deviated from presenting Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in 1975, there was one devotee who was at the time living in New Vrindavan. And before coming to the movement, he had been a published poet. His name was Van Das, and he's left his body now a few years ago. But the leader of the community at that time, knowing that Van had been a published poet, he induced him to write a book of poetry, and they sent it to Prabhupada. So what do you think Prabhupada thought about that poetry? Well, I'll read a few words from the letter. He wrote, my dear Van Das. And then he goes, I have read the Chintamani poetry book. Krishna's name is only mentioned in 2 poems in the entire book. What is this? There's so many poems written by great Acharyas. Why do you try to concoct something like this? It's not in our line. It's a waste of time, paper, money, ink, and labor. There's so much work to do for spreading this Krishna consciousness. And then he gives nice instruction. You should all spend more time reading my books very carefully and stop all this unnecessary manufacturing. And then he goes, why is there no picture of Krishna on the cover? If you have a desire, and then he backs a little, like he's giving these very intense and truthful observations. And then he says, but if you have a desire to write poetry, better you read 1 chapter of Krishna book very carefully, then put it into poetry. But do not concoct anything. There is no need for that type of poetry. If you do this, I think it will be appreciated very nicely. So Srila Prabhupada, fixed in the absolute truth, expected us to follow in that example. And at the same time, when somebody went outside that example, he chastised him, but then he gave him an alternative. If you want to do this, then here's what you should do. Another wonderful example of a Vaishnava is that a Vaishnava, a devotee, is equal to everyone. And this is Srila Prabhupada. Of course, we don't see him that way. I mean, we see him more than that. But he presented himself as insignificant. If somebody would make some remarks, some praise, he would say, I have not done anything extraordinary. And he explained that a spiritual master takes his disciples as his spiritual master. He said, that is the position. He thinks that Krishna has sent me so many spiritual masters, but he doesn't think of himself as the spiritual master. He thinks of himself as their servant. But because they have to be trained, Krishna has appointed him to train them. and therefore he thinks himself as a servant of the disciples. That is the position. So when one is advanced, he can see the importance of devotees. And an advanced devotee never disobeys or disrespects another devotee. To disrespect another devotee is a great offense. Vaishnavapara, Prabhupada said, very serious offense. So therefore we teach to address among the devotees, Prabhu, Prabhu, such and such Prabhu. This should not be taken by the lips, it should be realized. Everyone should think of other devotees as his master, Prabhu, not to become the master. And this was in a Nectar of Devotion class, October 23rd in 1972 in Vrindavan. So nowadays, Prabhu has become like a term for man in ISKCON, but Srila Prabhupada taught us to respectfully speak to everyone. Everyone means men and women, to address as Prabhu. And that made a very nice mood, that when one sees each other as the Prabhu, not trying to become the Prabhu, then there is a very nice relationship that can be built. He was asked if the spiritual master for everyone in the world, he was asked, are you the spiritual master for everyone in the world? And he kind of glanced down and replied, no, I am simply their servant. One time in 1977, which was his last year with us on the planet, the workers in Bombay, Juhu, were working 24 hours a day carving the marble to finish the temple. And there was this one elderly Muslim who would carve off to the side by himself, and he never stopped chanting Allah, 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 even during lunch. So Surabi Maharaj, who was the architect behind the temple, mentioned to Prabhupada how the name of Allah was this worker's constant meditation. And Srila Prabhupada immediately said, I want to go and meet him. And Surabi said, Prabhupada, I can bring him to you. But Srila Prabhupada said, no, I don't want to disturb his work. I will go there and meet him. So Srila Prabhupada was equal to everyone, and he saw everyone as being there as an opportunity for him to serve them. Another aspect of a devotee is that they are faultless. So one time in San Francisco, he had one of the early devotees, this is 67, had an early devotee named Krishna Das. And Krishna Das was doing some service for Prabhupada. He was about 19 years old at the time. And Prabhupada gave him a letter to post. And he started to leave the apartment, and then he noticed by the stamp there was a little slit in the letter. So he brought it back, and he pointed out, look, there's a little slit. You can see inside. And Prabhupada, mail it. But he wasn't convinced that he should send it with a little slit. So Prabhupada looked at him in a it was a firm, he wasn't chastising him, but he gave him some very firm information. And he said, know that all I do is faultless. So Krishna Das was kind of startled. And then Prabhupada explained to him, he said that this letter is going to India. And if a letter comes to India from USA, they will think there's money in it. And they'll open it and steal the money and throw away the letter. So this way, they can look inside and they will see there's no money. There's only a letter, and therefore it'll reach its destination. Shamsundar Prabhu was the secretary for Srila Prabhupada for 2.5 years. And he concluded that after closely studying him and serving him during that time, he could not find any faults or errors in Srila Prabhupada's behavior. Another quality of a Vaishnava devotee is that they are benevolent. So one morning, there was on a morning walk, which was always a wonderful opportunity for devotees to get a little closer to Srila Prabhupada. So this was again in San Francisco. And there was a new boy, and Bhakta Tom. And so he asked Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji, are there any other pure devotees like you in the world? And Prabhupada turned, he was on the left, Prabhupada turns to his right, and Upendra was walking on his right. And so he asked Upendra, how many of us are there? And Upendra said about 34 or 35. So then Prabhupada turned to the Bhakta and he goes, about 34 or 35. So immediately the word got out, even without the internet, news could travel quickly, that we were all pure devotees. And then Prabhupada qualified that anyone sincerely serving the spiritual master is a pure devotee. And of course, we came to realize that many different levels of devotion. And while Prabhupada, in his unlimited kindness, saw us as pure devotees for our meager attempts to serve him, there were definitely some much more higher level pure devotees, such as Srila Prabhupada himself. Another aspect of a pure devotee is they're completely attached to Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada once commented, there was never a time when I forgot Krishna. One time there was a reporter and he was giving an interview. So his first question is, when did you first remember Krishna? And Prabhupada answered by giving his birth date, September 1st, 1896. So the reporter thought that Prabhupada didn't understand the question. So he said, but I mean, when did you first remember Krishna? And Prabhupada again, September 1st, 1896. In other words, there was never a time when Srila Prabhupada forgot Krishna. Another quality of a Vaishnava is that they are meek. And we had nice examples of that happening at different occasions, but one that I particularly recalled was in San Francisco in 67, 68, in those era. And there was a radio show, very popular at the time. And the host for the show was popular because he was so rude and sarcastic to the guest. And in spite of the fact that he was rude and sarcastic to the guest, people wanted to be on that show because he had a big following. So there was an invitation for Srila Prabhupada to appear on that show, and the devotees were a little concerned because we didn't want to see Prabhupada being attacked by this sarcastic fellow. But Srila Prabhupada said, no, it doesn't matter, because he would chant Hare Krishna and they would hear Krishna's name. So he was ready to go. And one of the other features of this show was that the guests would be given a really short time to say something, to sum up the story of whatever they wanted, the message they wanted to give. And then there would be call-ins, means people who were listening, they could call in on the phone and speak to the guest. So Prabhupada spoke very, truth spoken concisely is pure eloquence. Prabhupada could give the entire Krishna conscious philosophy in like 2.5 minutes. So then the radio host says, okay, well, now let's hear from our audience. And so the first caller goes, Swamiji, what is the meaning of Hare Krishna? Actually, it was Gargamuni. Then another caller, Swamiji, I forget the next question, but it was a devotee named Uddhava. So after about the third one, the radio host says, let's, I think all these people are your people. Let's hear from somebody else. So then that somebody else was some lady. And so she goes, so Swamiji, and she just, like, you could tell she was not having a very good attitude. So Swamiji, you came over on a boat, right? Yes. And you didn't pay for your passage, right? Yes. So Swamiji, are you a freeloader? Now, I don't know about the other members in this audience, but to call somebody a freeloader in America is really rude. It implies that they have no, moral responsibility. They just take and they don't give. So that was where she was implying. So Swamiji, you are a freeloader? And Prabhupada just said, yes. Now became the most amazing thing, because I know I was thinking, and I think everybody else was thinking, oh my God, now this guy, the host, now he's going to just jump in and tear everything apart. But what did he do? He goes, well, I think we've had enough of her, and he knocked her off the air. And he never ever said anything critical or sarcastic about Srila Prabhupada. And I could understand, because Srila Prabhupada was authentic, because he was a pure devotee. He wasn't trying to be something he wasn't. And even this sarcastic radio host became affected by Srila Prabhupada's beautiful quality of meekness and authenticity, and not trying to defend himself against some foolish person. So he was meek. And another quality of devotees is that we are supposed to be self-controlled. And I don't know anybody that sometime somewhere in our life we may have kind of lost it when somebody said something we didn't like or accused us in such a way. But Srila Prabhupada was so beautifully self-controlled. If he did present any argument, it was on behalf of Krishna, not on behalf of himself. So in Paris, in general, of course, I haven't been there for about maybe 15, 16 years now, but at least when I was there, that was another place I had been based, was in France. He had a very beautiful program, and this program was at a very beautiful, auditorium. And the devotees had brought along the Vyasa sign. So, in those days, we were probably not always really sensitive to the mood of the country we were in, and how we might be inadvertently putting Prabhupada in an awkward situation, like bringing the huge Vyasa signs everywhere. One other place, like in New York, one time at the airport, devotees came with a great big Vyasa sign. So in this case, there was the great big Vyasa sign, and it was put on the stage. Prabhupada was sitting there and he was speaking. And one thing about French people, they are magnificently sarcastic. I think sarcasm is just in their blood. And rudeness, they just can be exceptionally rude, and especially to persons who were not French. So of course Prabhupada wasn't French, and most of the followers at that point were not French either. So this one person and a few other ones, they just started heckling. Heckling means agitating. And then finally this one fellow came marching up, and he goes, so why are you sitting on this great big throne? And Prabhupada looked at him very kindly and he said, you can also sit on the Vyasa sign provided you become Krishna conscious. So that really diffused it, because he didn't attack the person. He actually said, yeah, you can sit here also, provided you become Krishna conscious. But after that incident, Prabhupada asked the devotees not to bring in the great big huge Vyasa signs anymore. So another quality of Srila Prabhupada, but also of devotees, the devotees are very grave. you know, the materialistic minded person, they tend to become really hyper excited about things. And in fact, Brahmananda, in his little book, I think the name is Swamiji. Anyways, he was telling how Prabhupada explained to them becoming excited is for the non-devotees. Non-devotees become excited, but because it relates to sense gratification in one way or the other. But devotees become enthusiastic. Devotees look forward to doing things. Devotees have a different standard. So this one person saw a picture of Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada in the picture wasn't smiling, although we've all seen Prabhupada smile, and there are many pictures of him smiling. But then he mentioned to Srila Prabhupada, he said that, you know, why aren't you smiling? You know, aren't you happy? And instead of answering him directly, he turned to the devotee and he said, that person does not understand ecstasy. So, devotees are grave. And then one of the wonderful, wonderful qualities of Srila Prabhupada was his large-hearted compassion. There's so much compassion. Just coming to America itself was such an act of compassion. Of course, we know he was fulfilling the order of his spiritual master to preach in the West, but with such compassion. At one point, right before he left, he was telling one person that my spiritual master has sent me, you know, he's given me a terrible order to come and bring Krishna consciousness to the persons of the West. And he explained that because they are suffering so much for want of knowledge about Radha and Krishna. So out of compassion and also to fulfill the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Prabhupada took it upon himself at a very advanced stage. It was just prior to his 70th birthday. In fact, on that ship to America, he turned 70. So there was unlimited examples of his wonderful compassion. Just like in the early 26th Second Avenue Temple, when one of the drunkards came in with a roll of toilet paper. And because, you know, we didn't use toilet paper at all, and we didn't think about providing toilet paper for others, which would have been a compassionate thing to do. Anyways, this fellow, he was one of the Bowery bums, and he brought some toilet paper. And Prabhupada looked at him and he said, just see, he's beginning his devotional service. And one of the there's so many, there could be like days of speaking about his compassion, but there was a young girl who was visiting the temple whenever she could. By young, it means she was 16. And her brother, I already mentioned, was Krishna Das, the young man who had the envelope with the slit in it. So Sarah, that was his sister. And she was just 16. And he showed her, he'd given her a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, the early edition. And she became very attracted. Now, this girl had a really, really terrible life, actually. Her mother, when she found out she was pregnant, did not want the child. And to her credit, she didn't have an abortion. But what she did do, she gave birth to the child and walked out of the hospital, leaving the child behind. So that was, you know, that was the start of her life. And then when she got older, she would hold her back from school and send her out to stores to steal, to shoplift. And the result was that she had really terrible attendance, and her grades were like bottom, you know, like the worst failing grades. And she was miserable, of course. And whenever she would somehow managed to get to the temple. She just wanted to stay because she saw how the devotees were so happy, and she saw how her brother was so happy. And finally, Krishnadas one day during a darshan asked Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji, is there some way we can help Sarah? You know, she really wants to be a devotee. Is there some way we can help her? And Prabhupada thought for a moment, and he said, perhaps Sham Sundar and Malati can adopt her. Now, she was 16, I was 22, Sham Sundar was over 24 plus, almost 25. So we didn't actually seem like likely candidates for a teenage girl. But still, Prabhupada gave that suggestion out of compassion. So the next day, I went down to the courthouse to find out how this could happen. And I didn't take a lawyer, I just filled out all the forms, and then we were given a court date. So Sarah and her mother and her father, myself and Shamsundar, we were all called to the court. And one by one, the judge, a lady judge, she took us one by one into her chambers and spoke to us. And then she came out and she said, well, it may seem a little unusual that the mother is 22 and the daughter is 16, but I award custody to these people. And she hit the desk with her judge's gavel. And suddenly, Shamsundar and I had a 16-year-old daughter. So now Srila was thinking that now she can be with the devotees all day long. She didn't have to go to school, and whatever we were doing, going in Harinam or whatever we did, she would be part of it all day long. But to her surprise, Srila Prabhupada told her to finish school. And because Prabhupada told her, she accepted, but she didn't really want to be in school. And it wasn't even that easy getting her into the school. The school was just down the block from the temple. And I got all of her former school records, and I marched to the school with a sari and tilak. I told the receptionist I want to meet the principal. She goes, why? And I said, because I want to enroll somebody. And then when I met the principal, I gave the documents, and he's looking through and he's seeing, oh my God, she's got such bad grades. Her attendance record is so bad. So he wasn't inclined to bring her into the school. And somehow Krishna just made me speak very, very forcefully. And I said, it will be different this time. Just give her one chance. And I promise it will be different this time. And the man kind of, okay, one chance. So then she also had to go. She went the next day. She started school, and she went in a sari and tilak. And, there were so few of us at that time that we were, definitely a little bit of a spectacle. But she did well. Her grades went up. She never missed a day. But still she was thinking that she didn't want to go to school. So Prabhupada was coming back, and there was going to be a darshan. And she was thinking, I have something to tell Swamiji. And when he hears this, for sure he's going to tell me not to go to school. So during the darshan, she raised her hand. Prabhupada said yes. And she goes, Swamiji, when I go to school, the boys want to meet me. They bother me. They want to meet me. And Prabhupada looked at her and he smiled. And he goes, that's all right. When they ask for your address, give them the address of the temple. And that way they'll see Krishna. So that was his solution. And then she had a philosophical question. And she asked that question, and Prabhupada looked at us and he goes, just see how eager this young girl is for Krishna. And then he turned to her and he goes, if you like, Krishna will kiss you. So he was always finding ways to keep us safely within the confines of Krishna consciousness. There was another girl that came, and she was pregnant by somebody. Nobody ever really knew who it was. Maybe she didn't either. But Prabhupada was really concerned for her. And he got all the few little brahmacharis together, and he goes, this poor girl, she has no husband. and that means the child will have no father. Will somebody please marry her? So one of the boys actually volunteered for that service, Murari Prabhu, and married the girl so that the child would have a father and the mother would have a husband. This was Prabhupada's unlimited compassion. So Prabhupada was also poetic. And there's one book that he wrote, a book of poetry, it's called, that has now been published by the BBT. For a long time it wasn't. And in that book, the name of the publication is A Shower of Divine Compassion. If you can get a hold of it, definitely recommend it. I think it's online too, A Shower of Divine Compassion. It's the pre-USA arrival, and of course the beautiful arrival poem when he arrived in Boston. And he famously asked Krishna, so now, you know, I'm a puppet in your hands, and if you like, you can make me dance. You can make me dance. So in that book, Prabhupada had one other, there are, I think, 7 poems in the book, beautiful, beautiful poetry. And at the end of each poem, on one particular one, it was called Gitaragan, and Sri Gitaragan. So at the end of each verse, each stanza, Prabhupada puts, thus Bhaktivedanta recites the poem named Sri Gitaragan. Upon hearing it, the devotee becomes purified and his heart is endeared to Lord Krishna. So then I will end just with a personal meditation that the daily offering of Guru Puja to His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada was established in ISKCON between 1973 and 1974 as a regular part of the morning program in every ISKCON center worldwide. And it allowed, at that time, it allowed his immediate disciples and devotees to meditate and reflect upon the glories of our beloved spiritual master and offer him our tangible humble obeisances, deepening our heart's connection with our eternal spiritual master. And following his departure, this daily ceremony allows that connection with Srila Prabhupada to remain alive in the lives of his followers, present, past, and future, into the future. And it's an opportunity to participate in this blissful connection with Srila Prabhupada. And it's one of the many ongoing blessings that he bequeathed ISKCON members. And even so, anyone within or without ISKCON can take part in Srila Prabhupada's Guru Puja without any qualification other than the desire to do so. In 1973, Srila Prabhupada was at Bhaktivedanta Matter for Janmashtami and the installation of Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda. So prior to the arrival of Gokulananda, there were small brass deities of Sri Sri Gaurnitai that had already been installed and worshipped. So one morning during Guru Puja, this was following the installation, Srila Prabhupada suddenly stopped the ceremony and he was glancing around to see who was present. And he asked about the whereabouts of 2 of the prominent men who were absent. So the Guru Puja resumed as someone went off to locate his missing in action generals. But for me, this was a very instructive, a lifelong instructive moment that I will never forget, because just as Mangal Arti is not optional, I immediately understood that neither was Guru Puja optional. It's just as integral and important and valuable in our spiritual lives as Mangal Arti. And one cannot replace the other. Standing before him during Guru Puja, whether in a temple, at our personal residence, or wherever else one may be, one can reflect upon their vows, reflect upon our relationship and our service to Srila Prabhupada. And we can offer, if we like, further vows of service and surrender, or we can just love him. No matter how many or how few others may be present. It's just at that moment between you and him, for a very rare moment of very personal communication. And he acknowledges our presence, and he acknowledges that we are there, whoever we are and wherever we are spiritually, fully exposed in every respect to his divine loving grace that sustains and nourishes all of ISKCON and its members. And as always, it's up to us to accept it or not. And just as a postscript, I find nowadays that there's a tendency at what I call the minimization of Srila Prabhupada. And one tendency is expressed by the absence of devotees during Guru Puja. They may be there in the temple, but they're somewhere else. So they're over in the corner speaking to somebody, or they're up in front of the altar, so-called taking darshans of the deities, while their backs are to Srila Prabhupada during the Guru Puja. So it's a very wonderful opportunity to connect on a very deep personal level with Srila Prabhupada. And this connection to Srila Prabhupada is the protection this movement needs to maintain itself and withstand the 10,000 years going forward that has been predicted. And of course, we know that it is said Srila Prabhupada's books are the law books for the next 10,000 years. So as just a simple act of gratitude, it behooves us to be present during Guru Puja and offer our loving and heartfelt obeisances. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So in a few days, it will be Janmashtami. And of course, the very next day is the appearance of Srila Prabhupada. They're so intertwined in ISKCON. And it's just also one of those incredible situations, because you're up all night till midnight fasting, and then the midnight arti and the prasad. So, you know, some people don't even make it to bed, and the next thing you know, it's Mangala Arti. A very mystical situation. But again, it's up to us to accept it or not, to be there, and to always allow ourselves to be available for the glorious service of Srila Prabhupada, who has served us by kindly bringing us closer to Krishna and closer to Lord Chaitanya. Hare Krishna. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing Srila Prabhupada with us, and for sharing how we can connect with him and how to connect even deeper with him. Thank you so much for that. We have two questions from Sharadiya and Kaminiya. Before I give the floor to Sharadiya, I would like to read a comment from Facebook.
Facebook
It's from Rajalila Dixon Mataji. She writes, "My dear Malati Prabhu, thank you so much for sharing such inspiring and instructive pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. I and so many others appreciate you for your consistent example and dedication to sharing your most intimate relationship with your Guru Maharaj. With love always, Rajalila Dixon."
My head at her feet. I'm glad I just found out now she was there. Otherwise, I would have been so intimidated to even open my mouth.
Sharadiya, are you with us? I will hand over the panel to you to ask your question.
Hare Krishna, dear Malati Prabhu. I'm very grateful that you give us your very precious time. I know that you are highly in demand as a speaker. So I'm honored that you give us a time. And I want to ask you, if I remember correctly, one of the first times that I had the fortune of hearing you speak about Srila Prabhupada, you told us a pastime which you had with Srila Prabhupada in India when you were cooking for him. And some of the other devotees were giving you great difficulty in your service. Do I remember correctly? Is there such a pastime?
Well, there is. The devotees weren't giving me difficulty. The situation itself was just quite difficult because this was the first gathering of Western Bhaktas in Mayapur. And all we had was the land. There were no buildings. There was just a little Bhajan Kutir where Srila Prabhupada, which is still there, where Prabhupada was staying. And the rest of us were in tents. And they were quite leaky tents as well. Meant when it rained, we would not keep dry in the tents. And very, very rudimentary situation. Like for the water, there was like a hand pump and there was no drainage. So you just had to like get in all this mud just to get some water. But at least it was the mud of the Dham, it was the dust of the Dham turned into mud. So, but the difficulty for me was just the situation, as I mentioned. There was no facility. The kitchen was just on the ground behind the little Bhajan Kutir or next to it. No tables, nothing. You just squat down and do your business. And I carried a trunk with me with the basic spices, even my little cooking stove, which was a, kerosene. You pump it up and then it explodes in your face and burns your eyebrows, and that's your stove. And then there was a little bucket packed with mud and with a couple of iron bars across it, but it was a small bucket, it wasn't big. And that one I would put cow dung inside to create a fire for cooking. So that was my glamorous cooking situation, and obviously no refrigerator. So that meant that every single day that I had to do shopping, which meant I actually had to first start with the treasurer, who, the treasurers, actually, it's their duty to protect Krishna's money and see that it's used properly in his service. So he didn't automatically give me money just because I was Prabhupada's cook. So there was a little argument right there. And I appreciated, his efforts. It just was awkward. Like one day I wanted a pineapple because Srila Prabhupada liked pineapples. But he wouldn't give me the money for a pineapple because he said, well, he only eats half of it. So, it was like that. And then there was no shopping. And I mean, now in Mayapur, my God, it's like, downtown New York City or Summit City, there's just everything is available. But there was no availability at that point. There wasn't even a wall around the compound. Just, we were there in the rice paddy fields, and there was that little couture for Srila Prabhupada, and the rest of us, as mentioned, were in tents. There was a little stage further out in the field where we would hold programs, and either Jamuna or Bhavananda would be there chanting during the day. And electricity had recently arrived in Mayapur, but that didn't mean there was lights everywhere at all. And it didn't mean it would be working either. So in Prabhupada's Bhajan Kutir, there was just a single light bulb dangling from an electric wire, and it wasn't always on. And we were thinking this was pretty amazing. There was about 50 of us. We thought that was huge, that had come from different parts of the world. And Prabhupada's godbrothers were not particularly appreciative of our presence. And they were also critical of Srila Prabhupada to some degree. And one of the criticisms was actually that he had a lady cooking for him, which was me. Although my husband, Shamsundar, was his secretary. So, it wasn't really out of hand or anything. But I felt a little bad that, my cooking would cause criticism to Srila Prabhupada. And then, so I would, that kind of a situation. And plus I had a daughter, a baby, now she was a toddler, and a husband to look after. So I would have to go outside the compound. I'd have to go to Navadvip every day which meant either walking to the end of if you've been in Mayapur, you know what that means. You go down and then you get to the boat ghat and you get on the boat. And that wasn't even easy because, we were kind of an oddity, these white-skinned Westerners. So it meant we were going to be exploited like anything. So just to get on the boat, there had to be an argument, about I knew what the price was, but being a Western, the price was suddenly escalated. And then there were people that were not doing anything, but they were taking advantage. Oh, here's a Westerner and trying to exploit. So one of those people would stand between the boat, between the ghat and the boat. And so you'd go down and that person would be there trying to exploit money out of me just for the privilege of walking to the boat, And then, fight with the boat while, now they have a ticket booth, but those days you paid the guy on the boat. And then you'd get off on the other side and there was another one of these mysterious persons standing there trying to take money for no reason, just exploit. And then you'd have to take a rickshaw. There's another battle. You'd go to the sabji wala, the fruit wala, and then you'd have a battle. And sometimes I'd have to get some dahi or something and another battle. So by the time I would get back, and then it would be the same thing all over again. So by the time I would get back to to our little project, I had gone through 2 wars and now I had to cook. And I was constantly meditating upon pleasing Srila Prabhupada. That was my meditation. And it seemed like every day he would tell me something that I had not properly done. And one day I was thinking, I think I got it now. I got a little pride crept in. I was thinking, I think I got it. And then he would point out something else. So finally one day I really felt like, okay, I think I got it today. And on each plate, when you would cook, you would put some little pieces of fresh ginger, some adrak. You'd put a little salt, a little pepper, and some nimbu, little slices. So that was just a standing order, right, on the plate. So I bring in the plate. He looks it over and he goes, so much salt, it wasn't in the prep. And I just remember at that moment, I'm just thinking, I don't think I should be doing this service because I'm not able to do it. I can't, everything I do, there's something not quite right, So I started thinking that maybe I should get someone else to do the cooking. And my little mind thought immediately, yes, that's the solution to the problem. I'll get someone else to cook. So then I started feeling a little better because now I had a solution to the problem of my not being able to cook properly. And I'll give you an example. One day, aside from the one I gave you about the salt, but one day I was making this particular preparation that he had taught me, and it involved little pieces of eggplant, bacon being cut up small, and put in his had that little cooker, and serves the preparation. I handed him the plate. He looks at everything. He takes a spoon and he goes, so you are feeding me worm? And somehow or other, in the little tiny piece of the eggplant, there was a little worm that had somehow escaped my attention because he was inside the little chunk. But when he got cooked, he came out. And I didn't see that. But Prabhupada saw that and he goes, so you are feeding me worm. So ample opportunity to commit Vaishnava apara. So now I had a solution. And I was going to tell him the next day. But the next day, it turned out that his godbrothers, the ones who were critical, were coming for lunch. So I assumed that I would definitely not be cooking that day. And next thing you know, I was proven wrong. One of the devotees said, Prabhupada's asking for you. He wants you. So I rushed there. And he just started telling me what he wanted for lunch. So under the situation, it would have been a bit awkward to tell him I'm going to get someone else to cook for you. So I didn't mention it. I just took note of what he wanted, and then I went through the whole thing of, getting over to Navadvip and coming back and preparing the cooking. And when it was ready, I didn't cook for the godbrothers. Anand Prabhu, his godbrother who was living with us, and he was cooking for the godbrothers, but he wanted me to cook, so I did it. And then I came to the doorway that leads you to the Bhajan Kutir. Like behind his room was a little tiny space for his servant and secretary to do whatever they had to do. And there was a curtain hanging in the doorway that separated that space and his room. And that curtain was actually a very beautiful burlap rice sack opened up. So there was that, burlap sack that was now a curtain, and I moved it aside, and I see that little light bulb dangling, which is just a little bit of light. But there was Srila Prabhupada, and he was on each side of him, his godbrothers. I remember 3, but there might have been 4, but he's at the end. And he was absolutely luminous, glowing, much brighter than that little electric light bulb that was dangling from the ceiling. And seeing him in that setting where his godbrothers were on each side, and he looked like a diamond. Like when you see a diamond, if you just see a diamond, like you're from South Africa, you might have seen raw diamonds. But a diamond, when it's cut and polished, it's very luminous. And then when you put it into a setting, it's even more attractive. Put it in some gold or silver, some nice setting. Well, Srila Prabhupada looked just like a diamond, and his godbrothers were the setting that enhanced his beauty. And suddenly I felt very intimidated to go in there. So, but I had to go because I had his plate. So I got down on my knees and my elbows, and I had my sari, I pulled it totally over my head, like I covered myself with my sari, like this. And then I had the plate on my hand, and I started coming into the room on my elbows and my knees, and I put the plate down in front of him, and I start to exit in the same way. And Prabhupada said, "Yes, she cooks for me, and I criticize her." So the minute he said that, I realized that my consciousness had been all wrong. My consciousness, on one level, I'm wanting to please him. And when he would point things out, it's true, I was taking it like a criticism instead of an opportunity to improve. And then he said, "Yes, I criticize her, but she would slit her throat for me, and I would do the same for her." So at that point, I completely understood how I had the improper consciousness. But what he said was true. But it wasn't just about me. He wasn't just talking about me. He was letting his godbrothers know what the relationship was between him and his disciples. And yes, we would do anything for us and for him. And the reason we would do anything for him was because we knew and we'd experienced how he would do anything and everything for us. So that was a outstanding moment. And I immediately gave up my plan of finding someone else to cook. And the next day, the whole same thing was there. I had to argue for the money. I had to fight with the rickshaw wallahs and the boat wallahs and the sabji wallahs and all the wallahs. But instead of being something that was just bringing me down, it was actually quite blissful. It became a very blissful experience. And I'm forever indebted to Srila Prabhupada for his wonderful guidance and patience with myself and all of us. And to this day, if we just correct our consciousness in the mood of service, then we'll find whatever the so-called difficulty is, it's very blissful. So that was that story.
Hare Krishna. So I'm posing a question on behalf of another devotee. And thank you so much for sharing that incredible story. That's to hear it in more and more detail is really a treat for us. So this Vaishnavi has a dilemma with her family who she does not live with. So her question is, how should one handle their Krishna consciousness if they come from a Muslim family who are not understanding or accepting? How much should I share or not share with them? Should I hide my sadhana to avoid any offense to a devotee of the Lord and to the Lord himself? Because sometimes my sadhana and devotional practice is interrupted when they visit. And she was inspired to ask this because of what you were saying earlier about not being afraid to say the name of Krishna.
Yeah. Well, that being said, if you know that you will cause discomfort or offend your family members, and in this case, because they are in a contrary, it appears contrary, actually it's not, situation, rather than risk offending them and offending Krishna by offending them, because then they may say some unkind words, better you be just a little cautious. And if they ask questions, then you can answer them. But it's not that you should throw it in their face, you know. Haridas Thakur, we know he was Muslim, but he was ostracized and he accepted that ostracization. He had the full empowerment to do so. But unless we have that empowerment, we have it, but we may not be able to actually fully perceive it and therefore practice it. So better to be just very kind to your family members. If you can, give them some prasadam. If they don't want to take something that you've cooked, then at least like what Prabhupada would do when he would go to non-devotees, he would just have some cut up fruit. So in the same way, just for the little time your family members are visiting, make them comfortable and treat them very respectfully. If they ask questions, answer in a respectful way. And one never knows what the outcome may be. You know, it's up to Krishna. We're just his servants, and we can serve him sometimes just by being very nice to persons who are opposing, especially if it's our family members. And it may take some time for them to actually soften up and just accept you as you are, as a devotee of Krishna. But many of us went through that, whether, you know, our parents didn't automatically embrace Krishna consciousness, some never did. But my mom, after 22 years, she actually became very accepting, first of Srila Prabhupada, and then of course of the devotees. So you can't even know when and where it will happen. But just by being very kind and accepting of them and welcoming of them, then there's a better opportunity that they will also become accepting of you in your spiritual practice.
Thank you for such a compassionate answer. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. Okay, the question here is, Dear Malati Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for sharing yourself with us. You said something in your talk that I found intriguing. You said your relationship really started after his departure. Could you please speak further on this? The difference you found between serving his Vapu and your relationship after his departure. Thank you, your servant, Varshana Devidasi.
Yeah. Well, of course, the relationship was there, but it was very immature. And I don't have so much time to go into so many details right now, but that immaturity was initially after his departure, that immaturity became very obvious. But by the mercy of wonderful Vaishnavas, I was able to reconnect with Srila Prabhupada. And in doing so, it was kind of like, at the airport, they have these movable, you step on the running walkway and you just stand there and it moves you forward. It was kind of like I stepped on one of those running walkways, but as soon as I stepped on it, it went really fast. and I didn't resist it. I was very happy. And to be on that fast forward running walkway provided by Srila Prabhupada's devotees. And I was very happy, as I say, to take the association of devotees, not just of God brothers and God sisters, but others who followed. Because anyone who is serving Srila Prabhupada's mission, serving Srila Prabhupada, is very dear to Srila Prabhupada. And so my service deepened by chanting as carefully as I could, by offering whatever I would take, and reading his books and serving his devotees. And all of that brought me closer and closer to him, where I really found that, yes, there is nothing else in this life. Although I had known that and knew it, but by becoming more deeply involved in his service, that became fully connected, more fully connected. And just like in this verse from the Bhagavatam 3:25-25, if you read that verse and that purport specifically, you'll see how it works. Prabhupada outlines it there. I mentioned that earlier. So take advantage of what Srila Prabhupada has left behind. As I mentioned, the Acharyas, they leave behind the means. And in Srila Prabhupada's case, not only did he leave the means through his unlimited resources of his books and his purports, but there's so many other means that he provided for us. But the greatest one is ISKCON, the Association of the Devotees.
Our final question, unfortunately, for today is this. Hare Krishna, thank you for giving us the opportunity to hear about Prabhupada and to get a deeper appreciation of him. Can you please describe your first meeting with Srila Prabhupada and what was the quality of Prabhupada that attracted you to him?
Well, I would say there was two first meetings. The first meeting was through being reintroduced to two very dear friends who had taken shelter of Srila Prabhupada. And in doing that, of course, their lives had dramatically altered. And that was Mukunda and Janaki. And in that meeting, after they had become devotees, there were many amazing things. One was that, first it started when they got married, which for us was quite an outstanding thing because we were of a group of people, hippies, in our Sampradaya the hippie Sampradaya didn't think there was necessity of marriage. So when we found out they were getting married, that was in itself very significant. And I could understand that this Swami was not an ordinary person like some of the other ones we had previously met. And then that had taken place in New York. And then they came back to the West Coast where we were situated. And at the time we were situated on the top of a mountain in a very large forest area, protected area, national forest. And we were on the top of a mountain because Shamsundar had a job, although we weren't Shamsundar Malati, then we were Sam and Melanie. But he had a job to look out for forest fires by climbing up a very, very tall tower and look out upon this vast wilderness area for some smoke, which would indicate a fire. So we had a day off on a low-level fire day, and we'd gone to another mountain. So when we came back to our mountain, we saw a car, a little car, and nobody ever came up there. It was quite difficult. It was just a very narrow dirt road, switchback road to come to the top. So we were kind of wondering, and who would be here? And when we entered our little wooden cabin, which was just a wooden room with a fire, a wooden fire stove, fireplace, fire stove, which we would cook. And if you needed anything, like if you had to go to the bathroom, take a shower, take a bath, get some water, you went outside. And there was a nearby creek that was very pure water, so we could drink that water. We would bathe in that water. And very, quite simple living. So there, when we came in, were our friends, Jan and Mike. Jan and Mike. And also Jan's sister, Joan, was there. And they were coming back from New York from the wedding of Jan and Mike. So first of all, they had gotten married, which we knew that was happening. But then we found out their names had been changed. So Jan was Janaki and Mike was Mukunda. Joan was still Joan. And, when somebody comes to your house, Vedic custom, you give them a place to sit, you offer them something to eat or drink, but they'd already introduced themselves to our home before we were there. And Janaki was now cooking something on our stove. She had the stove fired up, and I didn't know what she was cooking, but she had these little balls of dough that she'd roll out into little round circles and then put them on the fire, and they were puffing up. It was really intriguing. And we found out that they were now vegetarian, which in those days was quite a thing. It wasn't accepted like it is nowadays. In fact, if you were a vegetarian, you were considered, probably you were also a communist. That's how crazy it was. So we had our first Krishna Prasadam, and during Prasadam, Mukunda said that after we ate, he wanted to show us a very special books. And those very special books were the first volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam, translated by Srila Prabhupada. And when I looked at the book itself, it was just so amazing, because at that point there were not very many connections available for such literature. And I'm just seeing that beautiful, the first volume, and there is a person lying down, reclining on a snake whose heads were, so many heads were there. And the person that was lying down was blue-skinned and four-armed, and he had a flower growing out of his navel. And at the top of that flower, a beautiful lotus, there was another personality. Only this personality had four heads. I'm just looking at this, and I asked, who is this? And Mukunda said, this is God. And that was so wonderful, because we had heard, well, yes, some people said there is God. Some people said there is no God. People said there was, now they say the higher power, but we had no clue. What did God look like? What did he do? And here was a beautiful picture of God. And some people were saying, especially among the hippies, that, well, everyone's God, or there is no God. You know, they was quite confused about the whole situation. Now, from a very, very young age, I understand that I was not my body, but the problem was I didn't know what I was, who I was. Now, here was somebody that was able to tell us, not only tell us, but show us that there was God and what he looked like. So just from that introduction of the Srimad Bhagavatam, I wanted to meet this person, Srila Prabhupada, known at those days as Swamiji, that I was attracted to meet such a person, because the persons we had previously met, they were just talking so many nonsense things that didn't even make sense. It made no sense. And here was a person introducing us to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I kept seeing that, reading that phrase over and over, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I wanted to meet this person who could introduce that person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the first meeting was through the books. And then next thing you know, and that was in 66 at the end of September. And the next thing you know, in January of 67, at the airport in San Francisco, I was meeting that personality, Srila Prabhupada, or Swamiji. And he arrived on a plane from New York to San Francisco. And we all know that he came to America on a freighter, a boat, a large boat. Now, sometimes there's these great big cruise ships. And a few years ago, there was an event that was put together by Srila Bhakti True Maharaj and his disciples, and Radhanath Swami was there, Chandramali Swami was there, and His Holiness, what's his name? I get his name. Somebody just mentioned his name. Sachinanda was also there. So we're on this beautiful, it was a cruise ship, and so much nice facility was there. But Prabhupada was not on a cruise ship. He was on a cargo ship. And that's how he arrived in America. But this cargo ship was not one of those huge, gigantic cargo ships. I had taken the opportunity to take darshan of the Jaladuta before it was going to be dismantled. So this was in Bombay, and I went to the area where the cargo ships were, and I'm looking up at all these big, huge ships, but I don't see. I was told it was there, but I could not see Jaladuta. I couldn't see it. So then I found somebody, and I asked, "Where's the Jaladuta? Where is it?" I'm looking up, and he's pointing down, and there, looking down, was this little cargo ship, like a toy cargo ship, Jaladuta. And when I saw that little cargo ship, it was just, how could he cross in that little boat? And if you read some of his diary, the Jaladuta diary, you will be also amazed, because it was a really difficult crossing initially. And he became so ill, seasick, they call it. And then the Captain Pandey, at one place in the crossing at the Suez Canal, the captain went off the ship, and he brought back to Srila Prabhupada a little cooker. And Prabhupada said that if it wasn't for that, he didn't know if he would actually be able to survive the crossing. Because But then when they finished the Straits of the Suez Canal, then they entered into the Atlantic Ocean. And there, Krishna took charge of everything. And Srila Prabhupada was able to survive because suddenly the waters were plying smoothly. And the Captain Pandey said never in his life had he experienced such a smooth crossing of the Atlantic Ocean, because Prabhupada said it was Krishna. He told him, it's Krishna. Krishna took over. So anyways, somehow or other, as Prabhupada expressed, when they first arrived to America, the first stop was Boston. And there you went through the formalities. The place where he would disembark would be in Brooklyn, New York. But first, this formalities, you have to show your passport, your visa, and all of that. And Krishna made it happen. He made it so that Srila Prabhupada was able to reach America without any further difficulty after crossing 6 different oceans, going through the Straits of Suez, the Suez Canal, and different places. No, Krishna was always there for Srila Prabhupada. I forget, what was the question? Did I answer it? I can't even remember what the question was, sorry. Yeah, so after the situation, Prabhupada was able to reach America, and we had the most wonderful opportunity of seeing him in person at the San Francisco airport. And that was his first flight because he had come over in that boat, that little tiny toy cargo ship. And now we were seeing him in person at the San Francisco airport. Yeah.
When it is always time to say goodbye and Haribol and see you tomorrow, I always feel like maybe next time we can hold time hostage and just continue hearing the wonderful leelas of Krishna and his wonderful devotees. But until that time, all I can say is thank you so much for sharing Srila Prabhupada with us. Thank you. Hare Krishna. And
Thank all
dear
of you.
Vaishnavis, and dear Vaishnavis on Zoom, if you can please unmute yourself and turn your videos on, and you'll have the opportunity to tell our dear Malati Prabhu Haribol.
Haribol!
Haribol, Mother Malati.
Haribol, Mother Malati!
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
For your association.
Krishna Krishna, Hari Hari.
Hare
My
Krishna,
Hare
Malati
Krishna.
Prabhu.
Haribol, Radini.
So good to see you again, Mother Malati. Thank you.
Haribol.
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 Hare Krishna.
My Gujarati family.
Thank you so much, Mother Malati.
Thank you.
So
Haribol.
thank all of you so much for encouraging me always.
Thank you so much, Mother Malati. This is always my favorite part when the devotees get to express their appreciation. And it's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for giving us your time and for encouraging us. We are eager for more opportunities whenever you might have time. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for encouraging me. That's really what is happening. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Bye.
Malati Prabhu.
Vaishnavis ki jai.
Bye.
Hare Krishna.
Jai. Vanchakalpatarubhascha kripa sindhubhyo
Eva Chakra Namo Namaha.
Namo Namaha. Anantapuri Vaishnavrinda ki
Jai.
Gosh, and we're only halfway through the festival. We still have 4 more days and 6 or 7 more seminars. This is amazing. It's like the original retreat all over again. Hare
Thank you
Krishna.
so much. Hare Krishna.
And we'll be sure to spread the word about this book also, Malati.
Yes, please, if you can.
Definitely. We also have Pranada Prabhu's book that we're promoting, so we're just figuring out how to schedule both of those promotions, but we're very excited and grateful.
We'll
Thank
just let people know it's there.
Definitely. Thank you. And if any of the ladies would like to stay in the Zoom and connect with each other, I'm going to leave the meeting open for a little while, so you're very welcome to stay. And if you need to leave, please leave.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.